during the Viking Age, but kind of these chambers would have been from a period before the Viking Age, and I can't imagine they would have been these labyrinthine structures. It's cool. Anyway, of course, the Viking longship, which is what we're seeing here in a smaller form when you think about the Viking Age. And one of the things that made them so successful, and they used sails in a way that hadn't really been used elsewhere. All right, so we're being dropped into a forest of some kind here by a giant bird to go hunting. Hunting, as far as we know from the things that have survived, is not a lot. Hunting was absolutely part of how people sustain themselves. What I assume here is in reference to the Viking Age punching a tree, which is not how they would have felled trees. So we have some kind of running around the forest, hunting, evidently. So we know that they hunted. Not sure what a grayling is, but they would have hunted for their food and fishing as well. There's a lot of axe heads and spear heads that have survived in hoards, so we know that those were used not only as weapons, but also likely as something that would have been used for hunting and kind of basic tasks around the farm in this kind of very agrarian culture. Picking up some stone here. All right, so we have here a stone axe, a crude axe for tree felling, which is going to be more effective than the punching, I think. Yeah, so stone axe, absolutely this would have been a tool that would have been used. What we have are more kind of crafted than basic kind of what you're seeing here, but, using these materials here. Medieval Scandinavia was an agrarian culture, meaning that they lived on farms of varying sizes. We didn't have these big cities like you have elsewhere in Europe during the early Middle Ages. People lived in farms. There were kind of chieftaincies or kind of regional districts ruled by kind of powerful men, but there weren't kind of these large medieval cities like you might expect to see somewhere else in Europe at this time. So absolutely, the main residence would have been something like this, like a farm. Descriptions, I don't know exactly if this is exactly how a fence would have looked, but there's descriptions of enclosures that are used for residences. Fishing, obviously, I don't know if they would have used a fishing line necessarily. Spearing with a spear for a fish was, as far as I know, what has survived. But again, I'm not even sure. My fishing history is not very good, but I don't think that they would use something that looks like fishing rod today, at least in the sense that we use it today. I was surprised to see that being used in the gameplay here. Something that looks so modern, really. Beehive, I don't know anything about beekeeping. That would actually be something really interesting to know more about, so I'd be curious to actually find out more about it, if it's attested at all. All right, we're traveling into another realm of some kind, it looks like. That was a portal of some sort. We've got a ship. So Viking in itself it's really like a job title. So the Vikings were people who went on these Viking voyages. It was basically farmer or tradesman or something like that, Viking. So it was a specific word used for men of freeborn status who were going exploring or fighting or raiding or trading. But it's what came to kind of define this period of time. And of course the Viking longship, which is what we're seeing here in a smaller form, is really, kind of what you think of when you think about the Viking Age. And one of the things that made them so successful, they were these really skilled sailors, and they used sails in a way that hadn't really been used elsewhere at the time. And they were able to tack them against the wind. Also, their ships were built in a specific way that they were able to sail them into really kind of shallow waters and things like that with the technology that they used. And as far as we know, they were the first Europeans to come to North America, and that happened around the year 1000. There were some voyages from Norse who had settled in Greenland. Leif Erikson specifically was the son of Eric the Red, who founded a Norse colony in Greenland, and they came to and had a temporary settlement in North America and what's now today Newfoundland in Canada. It was a temporary colony, possibly like a base camp for resources for things they couldn't get in Greenland, like timber for building and materials like that. But the colony didn't last for very long. It's unclear why that is, but there are some sagas that tell us about when the Norse came to North America. They're called the Vinland sagas. There's a saga of Eric the Red and the saga saga of the Greenlanders. And they talk about that, and they were thought to just be stories until in the 1960s, some archaeologists actually discovered the remains of what was that settlement, modern-day Newfoundland and L'Anse aux Meadows. Smaller Viking ships would have been suitable for using in shallow waters. They don't extend very, very deep below the water. So I'm not sure why there was a raft there. They're fighting a troll. Trolls are more like from later folklore. Trolls in the sense of what we see in later Norwegian folklore or something like that. So that's something you would expect to see in later folklore, not really in things from this period. Okay, so they're looking at a rune, which again, the runes are basically letters in an alphabet that was used prior to Latin being adopted. We're in these very heavily forested areas, typical landscape of kind of inland parts of Scandinavia. We have what here looks like it's supposed to be a runestone or a picture stone of some kind. It says burn their young. Typically runestones were memorial stones that said like this stone was, raised in memory of so-and-so who fell in battle at such and such a place or something like that. Not to say burn their young. Or burial chambers. Okay, well, this is nothing quite this extensive, but burial chambers and mounds would have been something that were used prior to the Viking Age. Mounds were used, but not like chambers like this. So there was both cremation and inhumation or burial in burial mounds that we know about as funerary practices or burial practices during the Viking Age. But kind of these chambers would have been from a period before the Viking Age. And I don't know enough about that period to say whether the size of them would have been, but I can't imagine they would have been these labyrinthine structures. It's cool. Anyway. We only have a few accounts of funerals, and it's not clear how reliable they are. So one is from an Arab merchant named Ibn Fadlan, and he gives this very famous testimony of a ship burning, and it's like of a Viking chieftain who is burned in his ship along with like a servant woman and who's alive, but he's dead, and they're burning it in this very elaborate ritual of cremation. And cremation was also sort of associated with Odin as well. But so we have some accounts like that, but it's unclear how historically accurate that they are and how much is embellishment for whatever other purposes. Okay, so we're crafting now. Craftsmen and various trades were important occupations during the Viking Age. Think about what we call the Vikings. Again, Viking being a job title, not like a name for a group of people. It's not just sailing. They're also known for being tradesmen and craftsmen and forging weapons. Obviously, like the smith was in a really important role because he made the weapons and the tools for the people around him and would forge using heat and the anvil, and all of these various tools that we're seeing here I don't know if it would have looked like this necessarily, but it's quite typical for anything that in kind of modern pop culture that's taking inspiration from the Middle Ages to draw specifically from imagery from the Viking Age. And there's kind of this grittiness about it, I think, that is somehow appealing. We do have a lot of artifacts that have survived from the Viking Age of things that were created by smiths in the Viking Age. This is very much like medieval village-esque. This seems much more elaborate than what you would expect. Again, fictional realm, so some liberties can be taken, but this is looking a lot more like a village of some kind, like a medieval village than that you would expect to see in the Viking Age. You have the long ship there, but this is like an estate of some kind of like the paved stones, and yeah, it doesn't quite look the part of what it's supposed to be. But we do have the ship there with the clinker-built ship with the square sail. Okay, and now we've gone somewhere else entirely, which is absolutely something looking like a castle. Some Viking-esque looking architecture, but this is looking like a medieval castle, not like structures that we know to have existed in the Viking Age. Absolutely something different. But yeah, it looks really cool at least. And this is very fortress right here. So we have the shields, and we do know that the shields were made of wood, and that they were circular. I don't know about mounting. Again, this is not a structure that I would expect to see, but they were mounted often, shields. There were places for them on the sides of boats so they could be easily taken up. Obviously, because the wood doesn't survive, 1,000 years or whatever, we don't have great specimens of them to know for sure. But we have some poems that describe what shields look like. They could be ornamented and have very beautifully decorated scenes on them. What we know a shield in the Viking Age to look like, which was kind of one of the main types of defensive equipment that people would have had. And again, in a structure that doesn't seem like something that you would expect. Towers and stone and all of this sort of stuff. It's looking more like later periods in the continent. Wish I would have seen a little bit more action on this particular gameplay, but it was still pretty cool, and it was interesting to see how they visualized what things would have looked like in this fictional realm. You can find me on TikTok, the Low Key Professor. See you next time.